Hi there, and welcome to the studio. This time we're continuing the deep dive into how I arranged, produced, and mixed Life is Cruel, Death is Kind. Specifically, this part will be about the remaining instruments: strings, choirs, synths, guitars, and vocals. It's going to be a lot to cover. Before we get started, I will say that if you enjoy my songs and want to support me, you can do that simply by watching, listening, and interacting with my releases, but you can also support me directly by becoming a patron, and that way you can also reap the benefits, including downloadable MP3s, instrumentals, draft versions, special Discord access, and more. Now, let's get started. Here we have the strings. The four main channels of strings are violin 1, violin 2, viola, and cello. In the bridges and outro, I arranged them like you would arrange a string quartet, with each instrument playing one legato line. Sometimes they play in unity and sometimes they form a three-note harmony. I'm using the legato patches from Spitfire Studio Strings Professional, and I've set the mic positions to be as close as possible for an extra intimate sound. They have no effects, processes, or sends to them, just a little bit of corrective EQ to pull out some unnecessary low end. Since these strings are quite intimate, but the song is very dynamic, I wanted to beef them up to sound more epic and powerful in the hook. So I added a couple of different patches from East-West, a 70-piece string orchestra, and a 10-piece viola section, each playing these highly percussive marcato patterns. As you can hear, they have a very different sound from the Spitfire strings, bigger, fuller, and further away from the listener. Together, they complement each other beautifully. Like with the Spitfire strings, these large sections have had a bit of low end pulled out, but no other processes or effects. As you can see in this lane, I'm automating the volume a bit, making them especially loud towards the end where they don't have any backup from the instruments, but that's it. Moving on to the vaguely named other group. This consists of different choir instruments. I wouldn't be surprised if you listened to the song a couple of times and didn't even reflect on them being there, and that's kind of the point too. Since I already have quite a few layers of my own vocals singing these parts, these choir instruments serve to bolster and add thickness to my own vocals. If we listen to these parts individually, you will notice that the male vocal is mixed lower in volume than the female and boys' choirs, and that's to prevent masking with my own vocal. Same as the strings, there aren't any compressors or processors of any kind here, just cutting out a significant amount of low end, both to make them sound further away, but also to prevent build-up in the low mid. I'm also sending the choirs to a plate reverb for extra space. In the hook section, the choirs dub the backing vocal melody. It sounds a bit silly like this, but if we add my backing vocals, you can hear how they thicken the sound and make them sound much larger without taking the front seat. Next up is the Synths group. Let's start with the Bösendorfer Grand Piano. This is how the song first came to be. I played these very simple lines, which are, I think, a C major with a major 7 coloration, and like an A minor with a minor 7, and A and F in the bass. This simple downward step melody is repeated throughout the entire song, except for the bridges. In order to not make these very simple and repetitive patterns feel repetitive, I played them by hand without quantizing or fixing anything. The piano has some light processing. This frequency EQ is only there to duck a little bit of the mid-range from the middle, not the sides. It is one band of dynamic EQ, and it is triggered by the verse lead vocal. So when the verse vocal is active, it will automatically carve out more space in the mid-range. Then there's a little bit of EQ and the tiniest bit of compression, and a bit of hall reverb. As the chorus hits, we're bringing out the rest of the synths. This is where the stereo field really opens up, and you might have noticed that this melody is exactly the same as I'm playing in the verses, but it feels different. The reason is that the bass line was C, C, A, F in the verses, with C major, A minor, and F major for chords, while the choruses use A, D, and F, with A minor, D minor, and F major 9 for chords. I'm not going to bore you all with music theory, so let's move along. The stab chords is a CS80 clone, slightly detuned, very long release. It creates this beautiful atmosphere and glitter, and I really like how it's allowed to ring out almost to silence before hitting a new chord. The inserts aren't many, but they matter. First, the crystallizer. It's basically a delay with pitch, and it adds a lot of overtones and glitter. Then the pan man to create this movement in the stereo field. And then the super plate to just smear all that out. That is beautiful to my ears. Next is the extremely unpersonalized synths 1 to 4. I believe synth 1 and 2 are EasyKeys 2 synthwave patches, and synth 3 and 4 are the brute patches from Soundpaint. They all play the same notes in unison, which is the main melody, but they each bring their own thing to the mix. Synth 1 has almost no attack, long release, and it's placed hard to the right. Synth 2, on the other hand, has lots of attack, shorter release, and placed to the left. Synth 3 is much warmer and larger, with a slight detune, and together they create one more or less cohesive synth that is very wide and big. As we hit the hook part, I'm switching out synth 3 to synth 4, which has a much thinner sound. Instead, I'm bringing in 2 different pianos who is dubbing the melody. Add the warm and airy pad and the synth package is complete. This pad is there to fill out the mid-range like a warm blanket, but often it can be a little much to just pull a blanket over the entire mix. So I'm also creating some rhythmic movement with sidechain compression. This compressor is set very aggressively, but only triggers off the sidechain noise channel up here. Listen to what it's doing to the pad as I unmute this channel. Now the blanket is warming without smothering. The last thing worth mentioning about the synths is that all these synths are routed through the Synth group channel, which has one instance of frequency too. Again, I'm only using one band in dynamic mode to lower the mid-range of the entire synth package when the vocal is active. This band is also set to MS mode, which allows me to only lower the middle of this EQ while leaving the sides untouched. Moving on to the guitars. I wasn't even planning on adding any guitars to this track, but as I wrote the hook part, I kind of needed something a bit rocky and rough to bring that energy forward. I'm using two different guitars to achieve this sound, using different pickups and playing different strings, even though they're all playing even quarters. The dist 1 guitars are played with a 6-string guitar, and I've cut out a lot of low end and emphasized the 2K area. The tones themselves come from Easy Mix presets. One is the Devin Townsend breakup tone, and one is the Mattias Ia Eklund rock chord tone. Having two guitars playing different strings and using different tones creates a lot of separation and width when panned hard left and right, like I've done here. They are grouped to this channel where I've used the SSL channel strip and Cubase EQ to cut out a lot of low end and give the top a nice boost. The Dist 2 guitars are played with a 7-string guitar, but one with the bridge pickup and one with the combo. They both use the Devin crunch tone from Easy Mix, which quite honestly is one of the most used guitar tones for me. These guitars are a bit more raw, with a bigger focus on the mid-range. They're very subtle in the mix, but definitely add a little something to the mid-range. Together, these guitars give lots of energy to the hook part. In hindsight, I could probably have bumped especially this 2 a little bit in the mix. Now let's take a look at the clean electric guitar playing in the second verse, and bridge as well, and the second part of the last chorus. They're just there to bring a little flavor, a little energy, a bit of human touch. I'm going to totally expose how lazy I am now by showing you the signal chain. As you can see here, I've used a compressor to reduce the pick noise, which I still think is way too abrasive. I've also used a transient designer on each guitar to reduce pick noise and increase sustain because the strings are so old. Like I said, lazy. So, these guitars don't sound very good in my opinion, but they add harmony and rhythm and a human touch that still has value. So I ran them through this group channel where I brutally cut low end and placed them quite far back in the mix. As you can see, I've automated the volume for these guitars to fit each part of the song. I can also see there's a little bit of send automation here on this sustained note to make it soar a little bit more. Finally, there's an acoustic guitar here in the second verse and bridge. It's just fading in here during the verse. Gently fingering an acoustic guitar like this brings out a really nice emotional quality, in my opinion. I've used 2 different microphones to record one guitar in stereo instead of recording twice and panning left-right. I'm not going to go into depth with how I processed these because I didn't do that much except compress, filter out low end and add reverb. Also, I haven't worked that much with acoustic guitar, so I'm not entirely happy with the sound. It does, however, blend quite nicely in the mix. Now, for the grand finale, the vocals. Quite honestly, this could probably be a third part on its own. I have separated the vocals into two main sections, lead and backing vocals. Let's take a look at the lead verses channel first. I wanted a very intimate sound since it was just piano and vocals. I used the Slate Digital ML1 to record, same microphone I'm using right now, and I sang very close to the microphone. I used the Kush Omega preamp through a DBX 520 de-esser and then the Sound Sculptor LA 502 optocompressor. This is what it sounds like without any processing.
Live your life like an angel, sell your soul to the devil, stand united or divided.
Pretty good, but a bit dark, which is unavoidable when singing this close to the microphone. So the first step was to cut out a lot of low end. I set a 12 dB per octave high-pass filter at 144 Hz. Then at the top of the insert chain is a RX10 D-click to remove unwanted mouth sounds, clicks, smacks, etc.
Hand you were given, pass your pain to the grieving, closing thoughts to believe in. What's the legacy you're leaving?
Now when I listen to these vocals with just a declicker, I hear that it's degrading the sound quite significantly. Well, damn. Time to reevaluate my choice of cleanup, I guess. Anyway, moving on to the next step is the Slate Digital Virtual Mix Rack. Since I'm using the ML1 microphone, which is a very clean and transparent microphone used for microphone modeling, I'm using one of the tube microphone models, a model of the Telefunken 251, which has a very nice body and top lift. Then a slight bit of de-essing, again, with a clone of the hardware I tracked through, and then a compression combo that I use quite often. One VCA type compressor that has a fast attack and fast release, the threshold set to catch the loudest transients a little bit, and then an opto style compressor. This is an LA2A clone that rounds off and thickens the sound nicely. Then the SSL channel strip, where most of the EQing is done. A bump at 200 Hz in bell setting, another bump at 700, and another at 7K. I'm also high-passing again at 66 Hz. Then additional compression with RVox and yet another de-esser. I did have a lot of trouble taming the sibilance with this vocal, and that's probably because I was singing very close to the mic. Could also be that I was turning my head to the left to look at the lyrics. Most of us have an uneven distribution of sibilance when we talk and sing. So I have 3 stages of de-essing, but they're all doing quite little. The final piece of the puzzle was to manually automate the pre-gain, where these abrasive S's were poking through. In other words, when I'm adjusting the pre-gain, I'm adjusting the strength of the signal going into the compressors and effects. As you can see, I'm not only lowering the pre-gain, but raising it a bit for some sustained notes that I want to bring more upfront in the mix. After the inserts, I'm also adding some additional 700 Hz and a top lift with a Cubase EQ. Let's get back to the automation lanes. These two control effect sends, so let's check what they're controlling. I've got 2 static effects on the vocal. The quarter dark, which is a quarter note stereo delay, where I'm filtering everything above 3K.
What's the legacy you're leaving? Are you ready to fade out?
It's supposed to be quite subtle, but makes the single vocal sound bigger. The next one is simply named Room. It's a nice, short room reverb that I like.
Hope you feel it was worth it. Don't you know, it's the end of the road. Don't you know, don't you know?
Again, subtle, but the vocal would feel quite weird in the context of the mix if it was completely dry. I do like the sound and sensation of a very dry and up-close vocal, like in ASMR or like you're hearing right now. But in a musical context, I think it needs a space of some kind. So, send number 2, the big plate, and send number 6, the half-note delay, are the ones being controlled by the automation. I'm using them at the end of the phrases to make them soar, and the half-note delay creates this call and response type of effect. I really like to do it like they did in the olden days where they played the automation live and printed to tape. It's naturally much easier today where you can easily fix any rogue move you're doing. And if you have a MIDI controller of some kind, I highly recommend you to listen to the song you're producing or mixing, close your eyes, ride that fader or knob, and just listen to what's happening.
Fold the hand you were given, pass your pain to the grieving, closing thoughts to believe in. What's the legacy you're leaving?
So I'm doing more or less the same thing for verses 1 and 2. Let's move on to the chorus, lead vocals. The processing is similar, but since I'm singing with more power, the distance to the mic is greater. And generally, I'm trying to make the vocal a little bit thinner to blend better with a more dense arrangement. The virtual mix track is set the same way. The SSL channel strip is more or less the same, also the RVOX and de-essers. But then there's this Lindell TE100 EQ, which I find very pleasant. I've used it for a gentle mid and top lift, and then I'm using the Cubase channel strip EQ to cut some 300 Hz and a tiny top shelf boost. The effect sounds are quite different from the intimate and up-close verse vocals. The quarter dark delay is the same, but then I'm using a ping pong delay as well, and a hall and an Abbey Road hall, which is a trick I picked up from Warren Hewart from Produce Like a Pro. It's basically a hall reverb, but with most of the low and top ends filtered out. I'm automating this snappy eighths delay for the end of the phrases for some extra energy and ear candy.
Life is cruel, death is kind. You can run, I stay behind you every step, and I am always in the back of your mind. Fade away and in stride.
I'm also automating the ping pong delay for the sustained notes in the hook.
I lust for life satisfied.
There's a dub to the lead that I'm saturating in several stages and tucking under the lead for just a bit of extra energy. Then 2 other dubs to the lead, singing the same thing but in different takes, but panned far left and right to create width to the lead vocal. Now we have come to the final element of this production, the backing vocals. Each of these channels don't have a lot of processing. There's some compression, de-essing, and corrective EQ. I think all of them have high-pass filters and some cut in the lower mids, but mainly I've used the fader level to get them in the right spot. Don't you know, it's the end of the road. They sound quite compressed and dense together, but it's not because of the individual compression, which is very light, but rather this group channel. First, I'm using an instance of frequency to further remove some sibilance. When it comes to backing vocals, I want the tone and notes of the vocals to come through, and the hard consonants and sibilants are usually not wanted. Then I'm running all these backing tracks through an AR1. The AR1 is a very colorful compressor, so I'm backing off the inputs and compressing quite gently to avoid any unnecessary saturation. Then finally it goes through the Cubase native tube compressor that squeezes the vocal package quite hard, but it's in 50% parallel. Then lastly, a couple of hall reverbs to make it bigger and kind of envelop the listener.
Don't you know that it's time to let go?
As you can see in these automation lanes, I'm adjusting each harmony group individually for each part to make their inner relationship balanced. It was important to do this since I sing very softly in some parts and with much more force in others.
Life is cruel, death is kind. You can run, I stay behind you every step, and I am always in the back of your mind.
Then I'm adjusting the main backing vocal group for each part to make the entire package blend well in the context of the mix. And that is how I arranged, produced, and mixed Life is Cruel, Death is Kind. If you watched through this entire video, well done. You're a patient person. I sincerely hope you found some of this useful. Leave any questions or thoughts in the comment section. Perhaps you had an aha experience, or maybe you want to point out all the things I did wrong and how I could make them better. Either way, I'll make sure to take it to heart. Thank you for watching. See you next time.